My parents kicked me out during my lowest point to support my abusive sister, so I built success alone and refused them forever without guilt. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I was labeled the difficult one in my family. Not because I was violent or reckless, but because I didn't bend easily. My older sister, on the other hand, was treated like she could do no wrong. Everything about her was described as sensitive, emotional, or going through a lot. Everything about me was attitude, tone, or disrespect. I grew up in a house where the air always felt tense, like something could explode at any moment if she was upset. I learned early to measure my words, my facial expressions, even my breathing. If she cried, my parents rushed to her. If I was upset, my dad would sigh and say, "Why are you making this harder than it needs to be?" My mom would add, "You're stronger. You can handle it." Any argument somehow became my fault. If she insulted me and I reacted, I was provoking her. If I stayed silent, I was cold and resentful. There was no version of me that was right. I remember standing in the kitchen once, the smell of burned toast in the air, listening to my sister yell while my parents nodded sympathetically. When I finally spoke up, my dad snapped, "See? This is what we mean. You're always so difficult." So I learned to disappear. I became useful instead of emotional. I did what was asked before being told. I solved problems quietly. I stopped asking for help because it always came with conditions or comparisons. Inside, I told myself this was maturity, that this was what being strong looked like. I truly believed that if I stayed calm, stayed helpful, stayed invisible enough, something would click for them. That one day they'd look at me and say, "We see you. We're proud of you. You matter too." I didn't know yet how wrong I was, or how much that belief would eventually cost me. I didn't realize my sister was abusive at first, because in my house, her behavior was normal. It started with comments that were framed as jokes. Little digs about my weight, my clothes, my friends. If I looked hurt, she'd roll her eyes and say, "God, you're so sensitive." My parents would laugh awkwardly and tell me to loosen up. As we got older, it escalated. She'd go through my things without asking, read my messages, then casually bring up private details in front of relatives. I remember the sting in my chest the first time she mocked a girl I liked at dinner, smiling while everyone stared at their plates. When I confronted her later, she screamed that I was attacking her, that I was always out to get her. My parents didn't ask what happened. They didn't want context. My mom grabbed my arm and whispered sharply, "Why do you always push her like this?" My dad told me to apologize because, "You know how she is." That sentence became a permanent fixture in my life. You know how she is. As if that explained everything. The abuse wasn't just words. She'd sabotage things quietly, cancel plans I made by telling people I wasn't coming, lie about things I supposedly said, plant seeds of doubt so others kept their distance. When I tried to defend myself, my parents accused me of exaggerating or being dramatic. If I showed anger, it proved their point. If I showed sadness, it annoyed them. I started doubting my own reality. I'd replay conversations in my head at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe I really was the problem. Maybe I was too rigid. Too cold. Too difficult. The house always smelled like coffee and tension in the mornings, and I'd sit at the table feeling like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. The worst part wasn't her behavior. It was the way my parents protected it. They wrapped her cruelty in excuses and handed me responsibility for managing it. I wasn't her brother anymore. I was her emotional shock absorber. And deep down, I knew something was wrong, but I still believed if I endured it quietly, it would eventually stop. I just didn't know how much worse it was about to get. Everything started falling apart in my mid-20s, and it didn't happen slowly. It hit all at once, like the floor dropping out beneath me. My job became unstable after a sudden restructuring, my hours were cut, and the savings I'd built quietly over years started bleeding out to rent and bills. At the same time, my mental health tanked in a way I couldn't hide anymore. I stopped sleeping. Food tasted like cardboard. Even breathing felt heavy. I didn't ask my parents for money. I was careful about that. I asked for something I thought was reasonable: temporary support, a place to stay if things got worse, reassurance that I wasn't completely alone. I remember sitting at the dining table, the same one I grew up at, my hands clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. I told them I was struggling. That I was scared. My mom frowned like I'd inconvenienced her. My dad leaned back and crossed his arms. Before either of them could answer, my sister stormed in from the hallway, already crying. She was having another crisis, another breakup, another fight, another disaster she somehow blamed on everyone else. Suddenly, the room shifted. Their attention snapped to her like magnets. "She can't handle stress right now," my mom said softly, rubbing my sister's back. My dad looked at me and said, "You're going to have to be patient. You're stronger." That word again. Stronger. It landed like an accusation. I tried to explain that I wasn't okay. That I was close to breaking. My sister shot me a glare through her tears, and suddenly my dad's voice hardened. "Why are you making this about you?" he said. "This is exactly the problem." The smell of dinner hung in the air, untouched, growing cold. I realized no one was listening anymore. They had already decided whose pain mattered. I went to my room that night with a knot in my chest, staring at the ceiling I'd stared at as a kid, realizing something terrifying. When I needed them most, I wasn't just unsupported. I was in the way. And I didn't yet know how far they were willing to go to remove me. It happened faster than I ever imagined. There was no warning, no build-up, no conversation about options. Just a knock on my bedroom door that didn't sound like a knock at all. It was sharp. Final. My dad stood in the doorway with his jaw clenched, my mom just behind him, arms folded like she was bracing herself. "We need to talk," my dad said, already stepping inside. My sister was in the hallway, sitting on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest, sniffling loud enough to make sure everyone could hear her. The house smelled like disinfectant and cold food, that stale, end-of-the-day smell that makes everything feel emptier. My mom wouldn't meet my eyes. "She's not doing well," my dad said. "Your presence is making things worse." I laughed at first. It came out wrong, cracked and thin. "What does that even mean?" I asked. My mom finally spoke. "She feels unsafe," she said quietly. "You've been very tense lately, and it's triggering her." Triggering. That was the word they used to erase me. My dad told me I needed to leave. Not next week. Not after I figured something out. Tonight. He said it like he was reading a grocery list. When I asked where I was supposed to go, he shrugged. "You'll figure it out. You always do." My mom started pulling a suitcase from the closet, folding my clothes with quick, nervous movements. I stood there frozen, watching my life get packed away like it was nothing. My sister watched from the hallway, eyes red, lips pressed together. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. As I stepped outside, the night air hit my face, cold and sharp. The door closed behind me with a click that echoed in my chest. No hug. No apology. No, "Are you okay?" I stood there on the porch, holding a suitcase I didn't remember packing, realizing they hadn't just chosen her comfort over my safety. They had decided I was disposable. And I had no idea where I was going next. I didn't tell anyone right away. That first night, I slept in my car, parked on a quiet side street with the engine off and the windows cracked just enough to keep the fog from building up. The seatbelt buckle dug into my hip every time I shifted. I stared at the dark ceiling of the car and kept replaying my dad's voice in my head, "You'll figure it out. You always do." The next few weeks blurred together in a way that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. I rotated between friends' couches, pretending it was temporary, pretending I wasn't unraveling. I'd wake up before everyone else, quietly folding the blanket so I wouldn't feel like a burden. Every morning, I brushed my teeth in strangers' bathrooms, staring at my reflection and wondering how I'd gone from the strong one to someone with nowhere to belong. My parents didn't call. Not once. No text asking if I was safe. No message checking if I'd eaten. Meanwhile, I found out through a cousin that my sister was telling people I'd stormed out and abandoned the family during her crisis. That I was unstable. Difficult. Dangerous. The same words, recycled. At night, the shame hit hardest. I'd sit in my car again, the smell of fast food and stale air mixing together, scrolling through old photos of family holidays, wondering how I'd misjudged everything so badly. I started questioning my own memories. Maybe I really was the problem. Maybe I pushed them too far. I stopped answering messages from friends because I didn't know how to explain my life without sounding pathetic. The loneliness was suffocating. It wasn't just about not having a bed. It was the realization that when I hit bottom, the people who raised me felt nothing. One night, parked behind a grocery store, rain tapping softly against the windshield, it finally broke me. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and cried so hard my chest hurt. Not loud. Just quiet, shaking sobs. That was the moment I understood something terrifying. If I didn't save myself, no one was coming. And I didn't yet know how much worse the truth was about to get. The truth came to me by accident, which somehow made it hurt even more. A few weeks after I was kicked out, I stopped by my aunt's place to drop off something she'd lent me months earlier. I wasn't supposed to be there long. I wasn't supposed to hear anything. But as I stood in the hallway, slipping my shoes back on, I heard my parents' voices drifting from the kitchen. They didn't know I was there. My mom sounded tired, the way she did when she thought she was being honest. "He'll be fine," she said. "He always lands on his feet." My dad sighed. "We didn't have a choice. If we hadn't pushed him out, she would have fallen apart. You know how dependent she is." Dependent. I froze. My hand was still on the doorknob. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid they'd hear it. My mom lowered her voice. "And honestly, if he succeeds too much, she feels threatened. It makes her spiral. This way, she needs us. It keeps things balanced." Balanced. They weren't talking about a mistake. Or a bad night. Or emotions running high. They were talking strategy. I wasn't collateral damage. I was the sacrifice. The one they were willing to lose to keep my sister exactly where they wanted her, helpless, dependent, and centered. My dad added, almost casually, "He's always been too independent anyway." This might humble him. Something inside me went completely cold. All the years I spent trying to be invisible, useful, understanding, none of it was misunderstood. It was inconvenient. My strength wasn't valued. It was a threat. I walked out without saying goodbye. The sunlight outside felt too bright, too sharp. My legs carried me to my car, but I don't remember driving away. I just remember sitting there afterward, hands shaking, staring straight ahead as everything finally clicked into place. They never planned to protect me. They planned to control the system. And for the first time in my life, I stopped hoping they'd change. What replaced that hope was quieter, and far more dangerous. After that day, something in me shut off. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but like a switch flipped silently in a dark room. I stopped waiting for messages that were never coming. I stopped replaying conversations, looking for ways I could have said things better. There was no version of me that would have changed their decision. Accepting that hurt, but it also freed me. Survival became my only focus. I took every shift I could get, even the ones that wrecked my sleep. I worked mornings, nights, weekends, whatever kept money coming in. My body was constantly exhausted, but my mind felt sharper than it had in years. Anger replaced despair, and instead of drowning me, it pushed me forward. I found a tiny room to rent, barely big enough for a bed and a desk. The walls were thin, the radiator clanked all night, and the place smelled faintly of dust and old paint. But it was mine. I remember sitting on the floor the first night, back against the wall, listening to the city outside, and realizing no one could kick me out of this space. I stopped reaching out to my parents completely. No updates. No explanations. Cutting that emotional cord felt brutal at first, like tearing something out of my chest. But slowly, the constant anxiety eased. I wasn't bracing for disappointment anymore. I learned things the hard way, budgeting down to the dollar, fixing my own problems, trusting myself instead of chasing approval. Every small win mattered. Paying a bill on time. Cooking a real meal. Waking up without dread. Sometimes, late at night, doubt still crept in. I'd wonder if I was being too harsh. If family was worth forgiving no matter what. But then I'd remember my mom's voice saying balanced. And the thought would disappear. I wasn't rebuilding to prove them wrong. I was rebuilding because I finally understood something important. No one was coming to save me. So I had to become someone who didn't need saving. And just as my life started to stabilize, they noticed. My life didn't turn around in some dramatic, movie-style way. There was no big break, no sudden miracle. It happened quietly, almost invisibly, the same way I'd learned to live. A slightly better job. More consistent hours. A paycheck that didn't disappear the second it hit my account. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without panic sitting in my chest. I didn't tell my parents any of this. I didn't post about it online. I kept my head down and focused on building something solid, brick by brick. I started sleeping through the night. I gained a little weight back. I even laughed again, though it felt unfamiliar at first, like a muscle I hadn't used in years. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed with my mom's name. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Her voice was soft, almost cheerful. "We heard you're doing better," she said, like she hadn't been the one to shut the door on me. She told me they were proud. That they'd always believed in me. That everything happened the way it did because they knew I'd figure it out. Tough love, she called it. My dad texted later, asking if I wanted to come by for dinner sometime. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just an open hand now that I had something to offer again. I found out my sister was still living at home, still unemployed, still recovering. Nothing had changed for her. Nothing except me. As I listened to my mom talk, I realized something unsettling. They didn't miss me. They missed the version of me they could use. The stable one. The fixer. The emotional buffer. When I hung up, my apartment felt unusually quiet. The hum of the fridge. The faint traffic outside. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in my hand, feeling a strange mix of anger and clarity. They were reaching out because I was standing again. And suddenly, they wanted access to the life I built without them. I didn't respond to the follow-up messages. But I knew this wasn't the end. They weren't done trying. And next time, I wouldn't be the one begging. A week after I stopped responding, my dad showed up at my place unannounced. I was just getting home from work when I saw him standing near the entrance, hands in his jacket pockets, looking around like he owned the space. My stomach dropped. He smiled when he saw me, the same tight smile he used whenever he wanted something. "We need to talk," he said, like this was long overdue and entirely my fault. I let him inside, mostly because I wanted to hear what he had to say. The apartment felt smaller with him in it. He looked around, nodded approvingly, and said, looks like you're doing well. No warmth. Just assessment. My mom and sister joined on a video call a few minutes later. My sister looked fragile, wrapped in a blanket, eyes red. The performance was familiar. My mom started with, "We don't want tension anymore. We're family." I waited. I wanted to see how long it would take before they rewrote everything. It didn't take long. They said I'd left voluntarily. That they were overwhelmed. That my sister had been at risk and they had to make hard choices. When I calmly corrected them, my sister snapped, "See? This is what he does. He twists things." Something in me stayed steady. I laid out facts, one by one. The night they kicked me out. The silence afterward. The lies she spread. The conversation I overheard. The word balanced landed heavy in the room. My mom's face drained of color. My dad's jaw tightened. My sister started crying harder, saying I was attacking her mental health. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I said, "You chose her comfort over my safety. And you never came back for me." Silence followed. Thick. Uncomfortable. Then my dad said the part that confirmed everything. "We thought you'd be over this by now." That was it. In that moment, I realized they weren't here to take responsibility. They were here to regain control. And for the first time, I was the one holding all of it. I just hadn't decided yet what I was going to do next. When I told them I needed distance, the reaction was immediate, and ugly. My mom's voice cracked, not with remorse, but with panic. "So you're just going to abandon us now?" she asked, like the irony didn't exist. My dad's face hardened, the calm mask slipping. "After everything we've done for you," he said, leaning forward, trying to reclaim authority that no longer worked on me. My sister snapped first. She accused me of being selfish, of punishing her for being mentally ill. Her words spilled fast and sharp, the same ones she'd used my whole life. "You've always hated me," she said, tears streaming, eyes locked on the camera. My mom nodded along, as if this was proof of something instead of manipulation. I felt something strange settle in my chest. Not anger. Not guilt. Relief. I told them I wasn't cutting them off out of spite. I was doing it because every time I let them back in, I lost myself again. I said I wasn't their emotional support system anymore. I wasn't the sacrifice they could offer up to keep the peace. I wasn't available. My dad's voice rose. He called me ungrateful. Cold. Cruel. The same words I'd carried since childhood. But this time, they didn't stick. They just hovered in the air and fell flat. My mom started crying openly, saying she didn't recognize me anymore. I almost laughed at that. I barely recognized myself either, but for the first time, that felt like progress. My sister screamed that I was destroying the family. I calmly told her there was nothing left for me to destroy. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by her sobbing and my dad muttering something under his breath. When the call ended, my apartment felt impossibly quiet. No adrenaline. No shaking hands. Just stillness. I sat down on the floor, back against the couch, and exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. I thought I'd feel guilt. Instead, I felt free. But freedom came with a final choice I hadn't fully made yet. And I knew once I made it, there would be no going back. The days after that confrontation were quieter than I expected. No angry messages. No apologies either. Just silence that felt deliberate, like they were waiting for me to break first. I realized that for most of my life, silence had been their favorite weapon. It made me doubt myself. It made me crawl back. This time, it didn't work. I blocked their numbers one by one. My mom first, then my dad, then my sister. Each tap of the screen felt heavier than it should have, like closing doors I was never supposed to be allowed to close. My hand actually shook when I blocked my sister. A part of me still expected punishment for choosing myself. Instead, nothing happened. Therapy helped me understand why that felt so wrong. I talked about being labeled strong as a way to excuse neglect. About being useful instead of loved. About how guilt had been trained into me so deeply that peace felt suspicious. My therapist said something that stuck with me: you weren't refusing them. You were finally refusing the role they assigned you. I grieved a lot during that time. Not the family I lost, but the one I never had. The parents who never protected me. The sister who never saw me as human. Some nights, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of traffic outside, feeling that grief pressed down on my chest like weight. But it didn't crush me anymore. It passed through. Slowly, the anxiety faded. I stopped bracing myself when my phone buzzed. I stopped replaying arguments in my head. I started noticing small things again: sunlight through the window, the taste of coffee in the morning, how quiet felt safe now instead of lonely. I didn't forgive them in the way people expect. I didn't send closure letters or make speeches. I forgave myself for staying so long. For believing love had to hurt to be real. I told myself this was permanent. But deep down, I knew the real test hadn't come yet. Because walking away was one thing. Living well without ever looking back was another. It's been a while now, and the strangest part is how normal my life feels without them in it. No chaos. No sudden emotional emergencies. No walking on eggshells. Just quiet mornings, steady routines, and a sense of safety I didn't realize I'd been missing my entire life. I used to think peace was boring. Now I know it's priceless. I built everything slowly and deliberately. A career that doesn't drain me. Friendships where I don't have to prove my worth. A home that feels like refuge instead of a battlefield. When something goes wrong, I handle it without panic because I trust myself. That trust was hard-earned, forged in nights when I had nothing but determination and exhaustion to keep me moving forward. Sometimes people ask about my family. I keep my answers short. We're not in contact. I don't owe anyone the details of my trauma to justify my boundaries. I don't owe explanations for choosing peace over proximity. The version of me that used to over-explain died the night I was kicked out. What surprised me most was realizing I didn't want revenge. I didn't need them to suffer or apologize. Their absence from my life was enough. The power came from refusing to participate in the dynamic at all. From no longer being available as a buffer, a sacrifice, or a solution to problems I didn't create. I thought cutting them off would leave a hole. Instead, it created space. Space to grow. Space to breathe. Space to finally hear my own thoughts without theirs drowning everything out. The guilt they trained into me faded once I understood it was never mine to carry. I don't hate them. I just don't belong to them anymore. The last time I thought about reaching out, I asked myself one simple question: would this bring me peace, or pull me backward? The answer was immediate. Clear. So I stayed where I was. Standing in a life I built alone. Whole. And for the first time, completely free.